You won't believe what our vengeful HOA president did when he ordered the demolition of my garage while I was deployed overseas. I stood my ground and called my sister, an investigative journalist with the city paper. But what we uncovered in the subdivision archives changed everything. Would you have accepted a measly $5,000 settlement after losing a garage that contained irreplaceable military memorabilia and custom tools? I stared at the barren concrete slab in disbelief, the dust still settling around what used to be my detached garage. The structure I'd spent 3 years customizing with specialized equipment and workbenches was reduced to rubble and hauled away. All while I was completing my final tour in Afghanistan, my hands trembled with rage as I marched inside my house, tossing my duffel bag onto the living room couch. 7 years living in Oak Ridge Estates, and the Homeowners Association had pulled some outrageous stunts, but this was beyond comprehension. The phone rang. It was Liam from 2 streets over. "Did you see what they did to your garage?" he asked, his voice tight with disbelief. "Just got home an hour ago." "This can't possibly be legal," I replied. "Everything I owned was in there, my specialized demo equipment, awards from my service, irreplaceable photos." Liam sighed. "Richard Hendricks has finally gone too far." Richard Hendricks, our HOA president with his perfectly pressed suits and perpetual smirk. The man who'd fined the elderly Sanchezes for planting non-approved rose varieties. The same person who'd sent threatening letters when the Wilsons' kids built a treehouse that was 6 inches over the height restriction. I hung up and surveyed the empty space where my garage once stood. Already, several neighbors had gathered nearby, shaking their heads and talking in hushed tones. My stomach knotted as I spotted Richard himself, walking the perimeter of my property with his clipboard, measuring tape in hand, nodding with satisfaction when my doorbell rang 20 minutes later. I wasn't surprised to find Richard standing there, tapping his shiny loafer impatiently. "Welcome home, Sergeant Reeves," he said with a practiced smile that never reached his eyes. "I trust you've seen the improvements we've made to your property during your absence." "Improvements," I managed through clenched teeth. "You demolished my garage without permission." Richard's smile tightened. "The board voted unanimously after receiving multiple complaints about your non-conforming structure. The garage exceeded the neighborhood height restriction by 14 inches, and the exterior paint was not from our approved color palette. So instead of sending me a notice to correct these issues, you demolished a $45,000 structure while I was serving overseas." "Notices were sent," he snapped. "When no response was received, the board exercised its authority under Section 17B of the Covenant. A settlement check for $5,000 will be issued for any inconvenience." $5,000, I exploded. "The tools alone were worth 4 times that." "Rules exist for a reason," he stated coldly. "Perhaps next time you'll respond to official correspondence in a timely manner." He spun on his heel and marched toward his luxury SUV parked at the curb. Pulled out my phone and called my sister Valerie. After explaining the situation, she gasped in shock. "They can't do that," she exclaimed, "especially not to active military personnel. There are federal protections in place. And as a journalist, I can tell you this reeks of improper procedure." "Can they really demolish a structure without court approval?" I asked, my training in controlled demolition making this unauthorized destruction even more infuriating. HOAs have broad powers, but they can't simply destroy private property, particularly when the owner is on active duty. Send me all your deployment paperwork and any HOA communications you can find. That evening, I sorted through the stack of mail that had accumulated during my deployment. Buried among the bills and advertisements were 3 official notices from Oak Ridge Estates HOA, all marked Urgent Violation Notice. The final notice, dated just 2 weeks prior, mentioned potential corrective action, but nothing about complete demolition. Martinez, the attorney who lives on Sycamore Lane, knocked on my door as darkness fell. "I heard what happened," he said, his expression grave. "I've been reviewing our HOA bylaws. This demolition wasn't properly approved. They needed a court order for destruction of property valued over $10,000, so it's completely illegal." "Can we sue them?" I asked hopefully. "Absolutely," Martinez replied, "but Richard has friends in local government. This won't be a simple fight." I slept poorly that night, fragments of memories lost in the rubble playing through my mind. The chaos, custom workbench, where I'd taught neighborhood kids about basic carpentry. The shadow box containing medals from 3 tours. The specialized tools I'd used in my military role as a demolition expert. Tools that would raise serious questions if found in the debris. At 7:30 the next morning, I stepped outside with coffee in hand to survey the damage in daylight. What struck me immediately was how precise the demolition had been. Whoever did this had professional experience. The cut marks on the remaining foundation were clean, utilities had been properly capped, and the debris had been meticulously cleared away. This wasn't some rushed job by a general contractor. My neighbor Eleanor approached, her face creased with concern. "James, I'm so sorry about your garage. We tried to stop them." "You saw it happen?" I asked. "A crew arrived at dawn 3 days ago. I showed them your military deployment papers that you'd asked me to keep an eye on your place, but their foreman said they had proper authorization." "Did you happen to catch the company name?" "Pinnacle Demolition Services," Elena replied. "Richard's son was supervising the whole operation. He seemed to be enjoying it. I nearly crushed my coffee mug. Richard's son, Devin, owned Pinnacle. A direct conflict of interest that made my blood boil. I'd competed against his overpriced company for several local contracts before my deployment. The pieces were starting to fit together. I pulled out my phone and called my former commanding officer, Colonel Breslin, now working with the JAG Corps. "They did what?" he thundered after I explained the situation. "That's a blatant violation of the Service Members Civil Relief Act. No civil action like this can proceed while you're on active duty without a court order. And as someone who specializes in demolition, I bet there were some sensitive items in that garage." "Nothing classified," I assured him, "but definitely specialized equipment that wouldn't look good in news headlines if improperly disposed of." "Send me everything you've got," Colonel Breslin said. "I know someone at the Federal Housing Administration who oversees HOA regulations. Meanwhile, document everything and don't cash any settlement check they offer. That could be construed as accepting their terms." By mid-afternoon, a small group of neighbors had gathered on my lawn. Many were veterans themselves who understood the significance of what had happened. Marco, who served in the Navy, brought over surveillance footage from his security camera that partially captured the demolition. The Sanchezes arrived with a casserole and stories of their own battles with Richard. Liam compiled a list of other homeowners who'd faced extreme enforcement actions over minor infractions. "We need to understand why they targeted your property. Specifically," said Elena, who worked as a paralegal. "Richard's been president for 3 years. What changed while you were deployed?" Liam shuffled through some recent HOA newsletters. "Look at these announcements. They're planning to install a new community security system. Every house needs to have matching exterior features for aesthetic consistency." I squinted at the newsletter. "Hendricks Security Innovations. Is that Richard's brother's company?" "His brother-in-law," confirmed Marco. "Something doesn't add up." The doorbell rang, interrupting our investigation. I opened it to find Amy Winters, the HOA secretary, looking nervous. "I shouldn't be here," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder. "But you need to know this wasn't about violation of architectural standards. Richard has been pushing through personal vendettas against homeowners who opposed his election last year. Your garage was specifically targeted because your demolition company underbid his son's firm on the community center renovation before. You deployed? My jaw dropped. He destroyed my property over business competition? Amy nodded. I've already said too much. They don't know I have access to Richard's private HOA email account. She hurried away toward her car. The following morning, I found an official letter in my mailbox with a settlement check for $5,000 and a liability waiver. The letter coldly stated that by accepting payment, I would relinquish all claims against the HOA and acknowledge the demolition as necessary enforcement of community standards. I called Valerie again. Things are escalating. Richard destroyed my garage as revenge for outbidding his son on a contract. Interesting, Valerie replied thoughtfully. I've been digging into Pinnacle Demolition's permits and Hendricks security. Innovations. Both companies have the same registered address, and there's a pattern of HOA properties feeding business to these family enterprises. I may need to bring my editor into this. As we spoke, a black luxury SUV pulled up outside my house. Richard emerged with his son Devin and another board member, approaching my front door with purposeful strides. I quickly grabbed my phone to record the interaction. Mr. Reeves, Richard began formally, we've received reports that you're organizing unauthorized meetings and spreading falsehoods about board actions. This constitutes harassment under our bylaws. Speaking of harassment, I countered, I'd like to discuss why your son's company performed a demolition on my property while I was deployed overseas, a direct violation of federal law. Richard's expression darkened. The HOA has broad discretion in enforcing community standards. Your continued aggression may result in further penalties. Such as? I asked. Devin stepped forward, smirking. The board can place liens, impose daily fines, even initiate foreclosure proceedings for continued non-compliance with community harmony regulations. I held up my phone, still recording. Are you threatening a combat veteran with loss of housing for asking questions about the illegal destruction of his property? They retreated quickly after that, but not before Devin muttered, "You should have stayed in Afghanistan." That evening, our impromptu neighborhood committee gathered in my living room. Martinez brought copies of the HOA bylaws with key sections, highlighted, while Elena arranged property records and violation notices in chronological order on my dining table. The Sanchezes provided a meticulous log of every interaction they'd had with Richard over the past 2 years. We need to understand their pattern, Eleanor said, tacking documents to a makeshift bulletin board. James's garage isn't the first structure they've targeted. Marco pointed to a neighborhood map. The Donovans' shed was condemned last spring. The Wilsons lost their custom fence in June. The Patels were forced to remove their solar panels in August. I studied the marked locations with growing suspicion. They're all on corner lots or properties with significant street exposure. Martinez nodded grimly. All high-visibility demonstration targets. Send a message to one homeowner, intimidate 20 others. Liam spread out financial statements that Amy had secretly provided. Look at these expenditures. $87,000 for community compliance enforcement in the past year alone. No competitive bidding, all awarded to Pinnacle. And here, Elena added, pointing to a quarterly report, a proposed $350,000 for the new security system, sole source to Hendricks Innovations. That's 10 times what neighboring communities paid for similar systems. My phone buzzed with a message from Valerie. Found something big. Hendricks filed permits for new construction on your lot 3 months ago, while you were still deployed. Meeting tomorrow, 10 a.m. They filed construction permits for my property. I showed the group, my voice rising in disbelief. Before the demolition even happened, Martinez examined the message. That suggests premeditation. They never intended to give you a chance to address any violations, The doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I spotted Hendricks standing on my porch, flanked by two men in HOA security polos. When I didn't answer, he slipped an envelope through my mail slot and departed. Inside was a formal violation notice. Unauthorized gathering exceeding residential capacity limits. Fine, $200 per participant. Repeated violations may result in additional enforcement actions. "They're watching us," Elena whispered, peering through the blinds at a car parked across the street. The following morning, Valerie arrived with a thick folder of documents and a man she introduced as Peter Rawlins, an investigator from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. "Your case isn't isolated," Peter explained, spreading documents across my coffee table. "We've been monitoring a pattern of predatory HOA practices in 3 counties. Richard Hendricks' name keeps appearing." Valerie picked up a property record. "Here's what we discovered. Permits were filed to build a model security installation on your property 90 days ago. The planned location, exactly where your garage stood. They're using my lot for a security system demo." I asked incredulously. "Not just any system," Peter clarified. "A pilot program they're hoping to sell to 50 other HOAs in the region. Your corner lot with high visibility made it the perfect showcase location." My mind raced. So Richard arranged to have my garage demolished while I was deployed, knowing I couldn't object, to create space for his brother-in-law's security system demonstration. "Precisely," Valerie confirmed. "And they specifically targeted you because your competing demolition business threatened their family enterprise." Peter added solemnly, "There's more. We found evidence they've been selectively enforcing violations against homeowners who might oppose their schemes, particularly targeting deployed military personnel who can't easily defend their properties." Just then, Elena burst through the front door, face flushed with excitement. "You won't believe what Amy just sent me." She placed her tablet on the table, displaying private emails between Richard and the board members. One message stood out starkly. "Reeves' property perfect for security showcase. His deployment timing ideal. Proceed with removal of non-compliant structure before his return. Standard settlement should suffice." "And look at the attachment." Elena swiped to reveal architectural plans dated 6 months earlier, showing my property with the garage already removed and replaced with a security station. "They planned this before I even received my deployment orders," I whispered. As if on cue, the sound of construction vehicles rumbled outside. We rushed to the windows to see a cement truck backing up to the concrete slab where my garage had stood. Richard supervised from his SUV, while Devin directed workers unloading metal security poles and equipment. What the hell do they think they're doing? I started toward the door, but Peter held me back. "Document everything. This just strengthened our case exponentially." I grabbed my phone and began recording as I approached the property line. "Excuse me, this is private property. You have no authorization to build anything here." Richard emerged from his vehicle, smirking. "Actually, the HOA has easement rights for security infrastructure. The paperwork was approved months ago." "Not by me, the property owner," I countered. "Failure to respond to official notices constitutes tacit approval under Section 29C of our enhanced bylaws," Richard replied smugly. "You should have read the updated covenant amendments circulated last year." Elena appeared beside me with her tablet. "Those amendments weren't properly ratified. They required a 2/3 majority vote of all homeowners, which never occurred." Richard's face flushed. "This is HOA business. You're interfering with authorized work. I'm a deployed service member who returned to find my property destroyed," I stated firmly. "That's a federal offense under the Service Members Civil Relief Act. Every minute you continue this work increases your liability." One of the construction workers, overhearing our conversation, quietly set down his tools and walked to his truck. Then another followed. Within minutes, the entire crew had packed up, leaving Devin shouting futilely after them. "You'll regret this interference," Richard hissed before retreating to his vehicle. "The board meeting tomorrow will address your continued non-compliance." As they drove away, Valerie nodded toward her camera. "Got it all. This is exactly the pattern of behavior we've been documenting across multiple communities. Your case might finally be the one that breaks this wide open." That evening, our group strategized around my kitchen table, surrounded by documentation and legal references. Colonel Breslin joined via video call, his JAG expertise proving invaluable. "Here's where we stand," Valerie summarized. "We have evidence of targeted demolition, falsified permits, violation of federal protections for deployed service members, and a clear financial conflict of interest. What we need," Martinez added, "is to present this evidence where it can't be ignored or swept under the rug." "The board meeting tomorrow is our opportunity," I suggested. "Richard doesn't know how much evidence we've compiled. He'll expect me to show up alone, angry, but ultimately powerless." Peter nodded thoughtfully. "A public confrontation with proper witnesses could work, but Richard won't go down without a fight. He's been orchestrating these schemes for years. He might try to bar us from the meeting," Elena warned. "The bylaws allow for closed sessions for sensitive matters." Colonel Breslin's voice crackled through the speaker. "Not when the issue concerns illegal actions against a protected service member. I've contacted the regional VA office. They're sending a representative tomorrow." Just as we finalized our plan, my phone buzzed with an alert from the security camera I'd hastily installed that morning. On screen, two figures moved furtively around the concrete slab in the darkness. A flash of light revealed Devin and another man drilling anchors into my foundation. "They're installing equipment in the middle of the night," I exclaimed. "Perfect," Valerie replied calmly. "That's criminal trespassing and property damage. Call the police right now." 20 minutes later, patrol cars arrived with lights flashing. I played the security footage for the officers, who approached Devin and his accomplice with flashlights drawn. Though Richard arrived moments later claiming HOA authority for the work, the officers were unimpressed. "HOA rules don't override state trespassing laws," the lead officer stated, writing citations, "and they certainly don't allow construction at 11 p.m. without permits displayed." As the officers escorted Devin from my property, Richard approached me with barely contained fury. "This is far from over," he threatened quietly. "I have documentation of numerous violations on your property that could result in tens of thousands in fines. Stand down now, accept the security installation, and perhaps we can negotiate a reasonable settlement." "I have documentation too," I replied, holding up my phone. "Every word you just said is recorded. Would you like to add witness intimidation to the growing list of charges?" The following morning, I woke to find my front yard covered with violation notices. Dozens of bright orange papers staked into the lawn like toxic flowers. Each cited a different infraction: non-compliant mailbox height, unapproved garden rock color, excessive sidewalk width. The fines totaled over $30,000. My neighbors emerged from their homes, witnessing this blatant intimidation attempt. The Sanchezes began collecting the notices, documenting each one with photos. Marco's security camera had captured Richard and two board members planting the violations at 5 a.m. "He's desperate," Elena observed. "These are fabricated violations. Muku, half of them cite bylaws that don't even exist." At 6:45 p.m., we gathered outside the community center where board meetings were held. Our group had swollen to over 30 residents, many bringing their own stories of HOA overreach. Peter Rawlins stood with us, alongside a stern-looking woman. From the VA and a county building inspector Valerie had contacted. Richard's face drained of color when he saw the assembled crowd. He huddled with his remaining loyal board members, whispering urgently. "The meeting room has suddenly developed plumbing issues," announced the HOA secretary, looking uncomfortable. "Tonight's session is postponed." "Actually," the building inspector interjected, displaying his credentials, "I've just inspected the facility and found no code violations or plumbing concerns. Falsely reporting infrastructure problems is a violation of County Ordinance 47B. Richard attempted to retreat through a side door, but found Peter blocking his path. "Mr. Hendricks, as a federal housing investigator, I'd like to discuss the pattern of selective enforcement and targeted actions against protected class homeowners." "This is a private HOA matter," Richard insisted, voice rising. "You have no jurisdiction here." "The Service Members Civil Relief Act grants us very clear jurisdiction," countered the VA representative. "Shall we discuss this here, or would you prefer a formal hearing environment?" Cornered, Richard allowed the meeting to proceed. As residents filled the room, I noticed Amy Winters slipping me a thumb drive with a whispered security camera. "Archives from the HOA office. You'll want to see what they said about your property." The meeting began with Richard attempting to limit public comments and rush through agenda items. When he tried to skip over open issues, Elena stood up. "Point of order," she called out clearly. "The bylaws require the board to recognize property owners who wish to address community concerns. James Reeves has the floor." I walked to the front, connected my laptop to the projector and took a deep breath. 3 days ago, I returned from military service to find my garage demolished without my consent while I was deployed overseas. I began displaying before and after photos. Since then, I've discovered this wasn't about violations, but part of a systematic pattern of abuse targeting specific homeowners for personal gain. The room fell silent as I methodically presented our evidence: the premature construction permits, the financial records showing Pinnacle's exorbitant fees, the security system contracts benefiting Richard's family, and finally, the smoking. A gun. Emails explicitly discussing using my deployment as an opportunity to seize my property for their showcase. "This isn't just HOA overreach," I concluded. "It's fraud, conspiracy, and violation of federal protections for service members." Richard lunged for the podium. "These are fabricated claims. This disgruntled homeowner is retaliating because he couldn't be bothered to maintain his property to community standards." That's when I played Amy's video, security footage from the HOA office showing Richard and Devin laughing about their plan. "Reeves won't be back for 3 months. Richard's voice rang clearly through the speakers. "Plenty of time to get the demo unit installed. If he complains, we'll bury him in so many violation notices he'll be fighting them for years." "What about his garage stuff?" Devin asked on screen. Richard shrugged dismissively. "Dump it. Military. Guys are used to losing things." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the audience. Richard's remaining supporters looked stunned, then disgusted. One board member stood up and silently walked out. Richard's face contorted with rage as he lunged for my laptop. "This meeting is adjourned!" he shouted, but no one moved. The VA representative stepped forward, placing herself between us. "Mr. Hendricks interfering with evidence in a federal investigation carries severe penalties," she stated calmly. "I suggest you remain seated while we conclude this matter." Peter Rawlins addressed the stunned audience. "My office has been tracking similar patterns across multiple HOAs in this region. What you've witnessed tonight is not an isolated incident, but part of a systematic scheme to use homeowner associations for private financial gain." The remaining board members distanced themselves from Richard, moving to separate chairs. One of them, a retired accountant named Barbara, raised her hand timidly. I signed off on many of these actions," she admitted. "Richard assured us everything was legally approved and that Mr. Reeves had been properly notified. I had no idea we were targeting a deployed service member. Or that Richard's family businesses were profiting from every enforcement action," added another board member. Martinez stood up, addressing the room. Under HOA Bylaws Section 42, we can call for an immediate vote of no confidence in the board president when evidence of malfeasance exists. Second, the motion. Called several voices simultaneously. Richard attempted to object, but the vote proceeded. The result was unanimous. Every resident present, including former supporters, voted to remove him from the board. As Richard was escorted from the building by security, Devin burst in, waving papers frantically. "You can't do this. We have binding contracts for the security installation." Peter took the documents, examined them briefly, and smiled. Contracts obtained through fraudulent means are not enforceable. These will make excellent exhibits in our case. The following morning, news vans lined our street as Valerie's exposé hit the local stations. HOA targets deployed veterans' home ran across the bottom of screens throughout the county. My phone rang constantly with calls from other veterans organizations, legal advocacy groups, and homeowners from neighboring communities sharing similar experiences. A week later, Richard and Devin faced their first court appearance on charges, ranging from fraud to violation of the Service Members' Civil Relief Act. They emerged from the courthouse to find a silent group of veterans in uniform standing at attention, a powerful visual statement about the community they had betrayed. 2. Legal proceedings would stretch on for months, but immediate changes came swiftly to Oak Ridge Estates. The interim board, led by Barbara and Martinez, worked to revise the bylaws, requiring transparent bidding processes for all contracts and creating an appeals process for violation notices. The question of my garage remained. Insurance covered only a fraction of the loss, arguing that HOA-directed demolition fell into a policy exclusion. That changed when Colonel Breslin connected me with a veterans legal aid group that specialized in SCRA violations. They're offering a settlement, my new attorney announced 3 weeks later. Full replacement cost of the structure, compensation for all contents, and additional damages for emotional distress. "No more fighting?" I asked, hardly believing it. Richard's insurance company wants this to go away as quickly and quietly as possible. They've also agreed to fund a complete audit of all HOA actions during his presidency, with restitution for any homeowner who was improperly fined or penalized. 2 months after my return, construction began on my new garage, larger and better equipped than the original. Neighbors stopped by regularly, offering tools and assistance. Marco and his teenage sons helped with the framework. The Sanchez's provided lunch for the volunteer crew each Saturday. Even Barbara joined in, meticulously painting trim on her weekends. "I'm trying to make amends," she explained softly. "I should have asked more questions when Richard started targeting specific homes." 6 months passed. Autumn leaves scattered across new landscaping as I put the finishing touches on my workshop. The security system that Richard had planned for my property was instead installed at our community center, purchased at fair market value from a company chosen through transparent bidding, with monitoring services donated for veterans in the neighborhood. I walked toward the community clubhouse, carrying blueprints for a proposed veterans memorial garden. After Richard's removal, I'd been persuaded to join the new board as community relations director, something I'd never imagined doing. "Nervous?" Martinez asked, falling into step beside me. As our new HOA president, the attorney had transformed our governance process with transparency and resident input. "A little," I admitted. "Presenting designs is different from fighting corruption." "You'll do fine," he assured me. "People trust you." Inside, residents chatted amicably as they took their seats. No more fearful whispers or tense faces. The atmosphere had transformed from one of suspicion to cooperation. "Before we begin," Martinez announced once everyone settled. "I'd like to acknowledge that today marks exactly 6 months since our community governance restructuring, and I'm pleased to report our legal defense fund has been fully reimbursed through the settlement with former board members." Applause filled the room. The neighborhood support network, Elena's initiative, had brought together people who'd barely spoken before. "Now," Martinez continued, "our community relations director has prepared plans for a new project that honors our resident veterans while enhancing our common spaces." I stood, distributing copies of the memorial garden design. As I explained, the concept, I noticed Devin's former house visible through the window, now occupied by a young military family who'd received significant assistance from our homeowner advocacy fund. After the meeting, Elena approached me in the parking lot. "Have you heard the latest? The county prosecutor is expanding the investigation to 3 other HOAs, where Richard served as a governance consultant." "How many homeowners were affected?" I asked. "Hundreds," she replied. "Your case was the key that unlocked everything. Standing up made all the difference." That evening, as neighbors gathered for our monthly community cookout, I watched children playing freely on lawns that once had to meet Richard's exacting standards. Gardens bloomed with diverse plants previously forbidden for disrupting visual harmony. Residents chatted across property lines that had once seemed like fortified borders. When asked to say a few words as we dedicated the first section of the memorial garden, I kept it simple. 6 months ago, I returned home to find destruction where there should have been protection. Today, we've built something more valuable than any garage, a community that recognizes its strength comes from supporting each individual within it, where rules exist to serve people, not control them. The applause was warm, genuine. As I looked around at these neighbors who had become friends through adversity, I realized that Richard had unintentionally given us a precious gift. He had shown us exactly what we didn't want to be, and in standing against his corruption, we had discovered who we really were, not just property owners, but a true community. My new garage stood finished, stronger and more functional than before, but it was the rebuilt bonds between neighbors that represented our greatest construction project. And unlike concrete and lumber, those connections would only grow stronger with time. If you enjoyed this story of standing up against corruption and finding community strength in adversity, make sure to hit that subscribe button for more inspiring content. Leave a comment below sharing your own HOA experiences. Have you ever had to fight back against unfair rules or treatments? Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss our weekly uploads of true stories about everyday heroes. Standing up for what's right. Your support helps us continue bringing these important stories to light. Share this video with friends and family who might be dealing with similar situations. Sometimes knowing you're not alone makes all the difference. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.